Millionaire abandoned his wife because she was infertile. 5 years later, he finds her with twin girls who looked just like him. Alexander sat upright, his gaze fixed on his plate with an air of disinterest. Across from him, Emily stared back, her eyes alight with a mixture of sadness and frustration. The weight of the silence between them seemed to stretch out, building pressure that neither of them could ignore. Finally, Emily couldn't bear it any longer. "How long are you going to pretend this isn't a problem?" Her voice cut through the silence, sharp and clear. Alexander slowly raised his eyes, narrowing them, as if he regarded her words not as an invitation to converse, but as an attack. "I'm not pretending anything, Emily. I've told you what I think. There's nothing wrong with me." He tossed the napkin onto the table and crossed his arms, as though shielding himself from further discussion. Emily leaned forward, her voice trembling with hurt. "So that's it? You won't even consider the possibility? Alexander, we've been trying for 2 years. 2 years, and you can't even think about having a test done?" Alexander scoffed, a cynical smile creeping onto his lips. 2 years isn't that long, Emily. You're overreacting, and honestly, why should I do a test? In my family, all the men had children without any issues. My father, my brothers. The problem isn't with me. Emily's face twisted with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "Do you even hear yourself? You're hiding behind ridiculous pride. This isn't about your male heritage. This is about us, about our future." Alexander leaned back in his chair, pointing at her with a finger as if marking a line in the sand. "Don't dare turn this into something it's not. If there's a problem, Emily, it's not mine. I'm healthy. You should be asking yourself what's wrong with you." "Aye!" The sting of his words hit Emily like a punch to the stomach. She blinked rapidly, trying to push away the pain that had hit her so sharply. Rising from the table, she couldn't sit there any longer, staring at the man she no longer recognized. "Alexander, don't you understand what this means to me, to us, or do you simply not care anymore?" There was a long silence before Alexander finally leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold and calculating. "Maybe I don't care anymore, Emily. I've thought about it a lot, and honestly, the lack of children doesn't bother me. It's clearly a problem for you. So why don't you solve it on your own?" Emily felt the sting of his words, her eyes burning with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She took a step back, distancing herself from the final blow she knew was coming. "Is that what you're saying, Alexander? That I should handle this alone?" He stood up, straightening his suit as if he were concluding a business meeting. "Yes, that's exactly it. I'll make it easier for you. Tomorrow I'll send the divorce papers. Maybe it's time for you to find another path, one that doesn't involve me." The weight of his words echoed in Emily's mind as she stood frozen, watching him grab the car keys and leave, slamming the door behind him with enough force to make the chandelier in the hallway swing. The house, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt cavernous and empty. Emily sank onto the sofa, staring at the void he had left behind. Her mind was flooded with memories of when he was a promising young lawyer, bringing flowers home and writing passionate notes. That man, the one she had loved, was gone, replaced by someone cold and selfish. Now, she didn't know who Alexander was anymore, or maybe for the first time she was seeing who he had always been. But along with the pain came something else, a spark of determination. Alexander might have made the decision to leave her, but she would not let that define the rest of her life. For the first time, Emily realized she didn't need Alexander to move forward. With trembling hands, she reached for her phone and began making medical appointments to investigate her fertility. If something was wrong, she would face it. And if there wasn't, she would find another way to fill the emptiness he had left behind. The cold, sterile white walls of the clinic stood in stark contrast to the warm, golden hues of the sunset streaming through the window. Emily, sitting in the cushioned chair, surveyed the room around her, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. She tried to calm herself, but her heart raced with anticipation of what was to come. When the door finally opened, the renowned Dr. Grace Davis entered, exuding an air of calm authority that immediately put Emily at ease. "Emily, thank you for your patience. Let's take a look at your preliminary results," Dr. Davis said with a professional yet welcoming smile. Emily nodded, forcing a smile of her own, but it was clear her anxiety still gripped her. As Dr. Davis carefully reviewed the papers, Emily held her breath, waiting for the verdict. After what felt like an eternity, Grace looked up over her glasses and adjusted them before speaking. "The results don't indicate any obvious problems so far, which is good news. However, there are more detailed investigations we can perform to better understand the situation." Emily exhaled, a mix of relief and frustration washing over her. There were no obvious issues, but that only left the cause of her difficulty in getting pregnant still unexplained. The next step will include hormonal tests, more specific ultrasounds, and, if necessary, a hysterosalpingogram. "It's a process that requires patience, but it can help us pinpoint any obstacles," Dr. Davis continued. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dr. Davis," Emily responded, her voice laced with determination. But there was something else she needed to say, something she had been hesitant to voice. She gathered her courage. "And what if my husband doesn't want to participate? He refuses to undergo any tests." Grace sighed softly, not surprised but clearly sympathetic. "Emily, fertility depends on both the man and the woman. Ideally, he should participate, but if he's unwilling, you can still move forward on your own. The investigation, in that case, will be limited to your side." Those words weighed heavily on Emily as she left the clinic. Alexander should have been there with her, supporting her, sharing the responsibility, but he wasn't. And as she had feared, he wouldn't be. On the way home, the silence between them was almost tangible. Alexander drove with one hand on the wheel and the other glued to his phone, alternating between messages and emails. Emily, sitting next to him, stared out the window, her thoughts spinning like a cyclone. Finally, she broke the silence. "The doctor said the initial results are normal, but that we need to investigate further. She mentioned tests that would be important for you too, Alexander." He didn't look away from the screen, merely responding in an indifferent tone. "I've already told you, Emily. I'm not doing any tests. I don't need them. Do you even care about this?" The words left her before she could stop them. Emily turned to face him, her voice rising with a mix of pain and frustration. "Because it seems like it doesn't matter to you at all." Alexander stopped the car at a red light, finally meeting her gaze, though his eyes held no emotion. "I've said what I think. If this is so important to you, maybe it's better to find another solution. I don't want to keep investing in this relationship if all we have are demands and problems." Emily's stomach churned, as if a chasm had opened between them. The awkward silence returned as they reached home. Alexander went straight to his office, while Emily stayed in the living room, staring at the emptiness. The house, once filled with laughter and conversations, now felt like a mausoleum. The music Alexander once played when he came home from work, the debates over the books she read, those things were gone. The place was lifeless, reflecting the absence of life in their marriage. In the days that followed, Alexander buried himself even deeper in his work, leaving early and coming back late, always surrounded by his cold aura. Emily, on the other hand, spent hours in silence, questioning where she had lost control of her own life. The void between them was suffocating, and with each passing day, she felt more like a shadow of the woman she used to be. Then, one particularly cold morning, Emily made a decision. She grabbed her phone and scheduled the tests Dr. Davis had suggested. Alexander didn't want to face the situation, but that didn't mean she had to give up on herself. For the first time in years, she felt a thread of autonomy rising through the chaos. As she packed her bag to leave, Alexander appeared in the hallway, adjusting his tie. "Where are you going?" "To continue what I started." "Alone," she answered, her voice firm, before walking out the door without waiting for a response. Alexander stood there for a brief moment, surprised, but quickly returned to his phone, as though it didn't matter. In the taxi, Emily looked out the window, watching New York pass by. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was taking the reins of her own life, even though there were still uncertainties ahead. If you're watching this far, I'm sure you're liking it. So I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel. The soft light in Dr. Grace Davis's office bathed the room, filtering through the large windows and casting a warm glow. Despite the inviting atmosphere, Emily's mind was heavy with tension. Sitting across from the doctor, she fought the urge to clench her hands until they ached, but her anxiety made every muscle in her body feel stiff. The folder containing her test results lay on the desk between them, an ominous barrier that she was afraid to cross. "Emily, Doctor," Grace began, her voice calm and professional, "the tests have revealed something very important. You have no fertility issues. Your reproductive system is functioning normally." For a moment, Emily couldn't react. The words echoed in her mind before they fully settled in. There was nothing wrong with her. The relief was immediate, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of frustration. She took a deep breath, trying to process the whirlwind of emotions that were flooding her. "So, then why?" Her voice faltered and she swallowed hard. "Why can't we get pregnant?" Dr. Grace leaned slightly forward, maintaining her considerate tone. "As I've mentioned before, fertility is something that involves both partners, Emily. There's nothing to suggest the problem lies with you, but without your partner's cooperation, we can't be sure what might be hindering things." Emily turned her gaze away, staring out the window as the sting of the doctor's words sank in. It was obvious the problem might be Alexander. She had always known that, but he would never admit it. "He refuses to get tested," she murmured, more to herself than to the doctor. "This isn't unusual," Dr. Grace responded with understanding. "For many men, there's a stigma associated with questioning their fertility. It's a psychological and cultural barrier that can be difficult to overcome. But Emily, you need to ask yourself, how far are you willing to carry this burden alone?" The question hit Emily with force. Her eyes burned, but she refused to let tears fall in front of Dr. Grace. "I just want him to be honest," she said quietly. "I want him to say he's scared or unsure, anything, but he prefers to hide behind this idea that genetics is enough." "That's a defense mechanism," the doctor explained gently. "He's avoiding confronting the possibility that the problem might lie with him. But you can't control his actions, Emily. What you can control is how you take care of yourself through this process." Emily nodded slowly, the weight of Dr. Grace's words settling on her shoulders. The doctor continued, her tone now more serious. "I need to be honest with you, Emily. The stress from this conflict in your marriage may be affecting your health in ways that go beyond fertility. Your emotional and mental peace matters too. Prioritizing your well-being is not selfish, it's necessary." As Emily left the clinic, she felt exhausted, but something had changed. The guilt she had carried for years seemed to begin to dissipate. She walked through the bustling streets of New York, trying to collect her scattered thoughts. Alexander had never truly supported her through this process, but she had allowed herself to believe that if she was enough, he would change. Now she was starting to accept that she had placed a burden on herself that wasn't hers to bear. When she arrived home, Alexander was in his office as usual, surrounded by papers and glued to his phone. He didn't even notice when she walked in. Emily stopped in the doorway for a moment, watching the man who had once been the center of her world. He wasn't concerned, not even curious, about the test results. She knew that if she told him there was nothing wrong with her, he'd find a way to dismiss it or downplay it. "That's great, Emily. It's probably just a matter of time," he would likely say, never admitting that he too should be involved. She didn't want to hear that. She didn't want to deal with his denial anymore. Instead of confronting him, she went upstairs to their bedroom. Sitting on the bed, she stared into the mirror, seeing a woman who appeared more tired than she remembered. But at the same time, she saw a woman beginning to rediscover herself. A woman who knew that in order to continue her journey, she needed to let go of a marriage that no longer offered support, only pain. Emily made a decision in that moment. She would continue with the tests and everything else that was necessary, but she would do it alone. Alexander had chosen to be a bystander in his own life, and she couldn't allow herself to do the same. For the first time, she felt a sense of relief, imagining a future where he wasn't a part of it, because if he couldn't be her partner in the difficult times, she would face them without him. As she gathered the papers from the appointment to put them away, Emily realized her determination was growing. It was as if, over the years, Alexander had erased parts of her. Now, each decision made on her own felt like a piece of herself returning to its rightful place. She didn't know exactly where this path would lead her, but one thing was certain: it would be hers, and only hers. Emily ran her hands over the closet, her fingers brushing against the hangers that held clothes she had once chosen with enthusiasm, hoping to please Alexander or create happy memories by his side. Now, as she picked out what she would take with her, she realized many of these pieces no longer represented who she was. They were echoes of a life that had lost its meaning. She grabbed only the essentials, folding each item carefully and placing them in the open suitcase on the bed. With every movement, it felt like she was dismantling pieces of a puzzle she no longer wanted to try to assemble. Olivia arrived shortly after, bringing with her an infectious energy that contrasted sharply with the melancholy that filled the room. Her friend, with whom Emily had shared nearly a decade of friendship, entered without ceremony and embraced her tightly. "So it's today?" she asked, looking directly into Emily's eyes. "Yes. I can't delay this any longer. I need to leave before I completely forget who I am." Emily's voice was firm, but it carried an undercurrent of vulnerability that Olivia immediately recognized. "You're doing the right thing, my friend. All of this is not for you. You deserve more, and I'm here to help you remember that, even when you forget," Olivia said, taking one of the boxes and starting to organize important documents and personal items. Emily couldn't help but let out a small smile. Olivia had always been like this, practical and determined, but also filled with an empathy that seemed to envelop everyone around her. "Thank you, Adri. I really don't know what I'd do without you." Olivia returned the smile while fitting a stack of books into another box. "You do the same for me. Now let's focus on making sure you leave here without leaving anything important behind." The next hours passed in productive silence, interrupted only by occasional words or knowing smiles. Each box they closed represented another step toward Emily's freedom. Olivia, sensing the emotional weight of the moment, made sure to keep the atmosphere light, commenting on the apartment Emily had rented in Portland. "You're going to love it there. It's such a charming neighborhood. There's that amazing market and so many beautiful squares. It's going to be the perfect place for you to start fresh." Emily nodded, feeling a mix of hope and sadness. The apartment was small, but it had a balcony that she could already imagine being filled with plants and natural light. For the first time in years, she would have a space that would be entirely hers, free from Alexander's shadow or the expectations he had placed on her. Before leaving, Emily took a piece of paper and a pen. She sat at the living room table, where so many unspoken conversations had accumulated over the years. The words came slowly, but with clarity. She carefully wrote the letter, explaining that the medical results confirmed her fertility was intact, but that it no longer mattered. The letter was not an apology, nor an attempt at reconciliation. It was an act of closure. "You chose to walk away. I choose to move forward," she wrote, signing her name without titles or sentimentalities. She placed the letter on the table next to the house keys and took one last look around. The room seemed strangely empty despite the furniture. It was as though, in deciding to leave, she had already taken with her everything that truly mattered. When Olivia returned to help her carry the bags to the car, she found Emily standing in the living room, lost in thought. "Last chance to change your mind," Olivia joked, trying to ease the tension. Emily smiled faintly and shook her head. "No, it's the end, and the beginning, I think." The drive to Portland was silent, but this time the silence was comforting. Olivia parked in front of the building, and they started unloading the items. The apartment was just as small as Emily remembered, but the light pouring in through the balcony made it feel bigger and more welcoming. As they unpacked the boxes and bags, Olivia opened a bottle of wine she had brought as a gift. "Here's to your new beginning," Olivia said, handing a glass to Emily. Emily raised her glass, feeling an invisible weight lift off her shoulders. "To the new beginning," she said, with renewed determination. In the following days, Emily began to rediscover herself. She decided to return to law school, a path she had abandoned years ago when Alexander had convinced her that she didn't need a career, only a life by his side. Sitting in class, surrounded by enthusiastic young peers, she felt an energy she hadn't experienced in years. Her days were now filled with books, debates, and the excitement of learning something new. More than that, she felt like she was building something that was entirely hers. Her nights were peaceful in the small apartment, but there was comfort in the simplicity. She sat on the balcony, sipping tea as she reviewed notes, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she had control over her own destiny. Every morning, Emily woke early in her small apartment in Portland, the soft sunlight filtering through the balcony, filling the space with a serene energy. It was a stark contrast to the oppressive home she had shared with Alexander. Now, each day promised something new, and Emily embraced it with renewed determination. On campus, she quickly stood out. Her law classes reignited a passion she rediscovered with every heated debate and challenging presentation. Emily was the first to raise her hand, the first to offer a sharp, well-reasoned argument. Her classmates admired her confident demeanor, but few knew that this newfound self-assurance was something she had painstakingly rebuilt, piece by piece, as if she were reassembling a shattered work of art. At one of the seminars, while explaining with eloquence the principles of shared custody and women's rights in divorce cases, the room fell into absolute silence. Even the professor, known for being demanding, stopped to praise her at the end. "Emily, your analysis was flawless. You not only understood the concept, but you presented it in a way that everyone here could clearly visualize. Keep it up, and you'll have a brilliant future." Her classmates applauded, and Emily felt a wave of pride, but also gratitude. After all, it wasn't just about being good, it was about finally believing in herself. Outside of class, her new life challenged her to explore horizons that had once seemed impossible. During a conversation with Olivia while they were strolling through the Portland market, Emily confessed something that had been growing in her heart. "Adri, I've been thinking about something, about being a mother, but alone." Her friend stopped, looking at her with surprise and admiration. "Emily, that's amazing, but have you thought about the details? It's a big decision." "Yes, and it's scary, but you know what? I've always wanted to be a mother. And now I feel like I'm ready to do it for the right reasons, for myself, not to meet someone else's expectations. Olivia smiled and took Emily's hand. I always knew you were brave, but this is next level. I'm here for whatever you need. Soon after, Emily was invited to speak at an academic event about family law. She was nervous but excited. She carefully chose the topic for her presentation: the challenges women face in accessing family justice. When she stepped onto the stage, with dozens of eyes fixed on her, she felt a mixture of anxiety and power. Emily spoke with passion, sharing personal experiences and technical knowledge in a way that captivated the audience. Among the participants at the event was William Brown, a renowned lawyer specializing in medical and reproductive law. He watched Emily with interest, admiring not just her eloquence, but the conviction behind her words. After the panel, William approached her. Emily, congratulations on your presentation. You managed to take a complex topic and present it with impressive clarity. Still catching her breath from the tension of the moment, Emily smiled shyly. Thank you. I didn't know someone with your background was in the audience. I hope I met your expectations. He chuckled lightly, but with sincerity. Emily, you exceeded any expectations. Call me William, please. I think we have a lot in common, especially when it comes to giving a voice to women on issues that are often overlooked. The conversation flowed naturally. William was a man of calm and assured speech, but his ideas had depth. When Emily briefly mentioned her interest in exploring solo motherhood, his eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Did you know that advances in vitro fertilization are making this dream more and more accessible? I've worked with women who've made this choice, and it's incredible how transformative the process can be, both personally and emotionally. Emily felt an instant connection with William. He not only understood the challenges she was facing, but he also seemed genuinely interested in helping her find solutions. Before they parted, he handed her his card. If you ever need guidance, professional or personal, I'm here for you. And of course, if you just want to talk about what's coming next. In the following days, Emily reflected a lot on what William had said. The idea of in vitro fertilization was something she'd never seriously considered before, but now it seemed more possible, more real. There was something reassuring about knowing she had options, that her journey didn't have to be defined by someone else's choices. The morning light streamed into the clinic's room, warming the air as Emily lightly squeezed William's arm. They sat side by side in the stylish reception area of Dr. Victoria Taylor's office, one of the top experts in vitro fertilization in New York. Emily tried to calm the nerves bubbling inside her, while William, ever the calming presence, offered a reassuring smile. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. Emily looked at him, hesitant but resolute. "Honestly, I don't know, but I think I've never been more certain that I need to try." Soon after, Dr. Victoria appeared at the door, calling them with a warm but professional energy. "Emily, William, thank you for coming. Let's discuss the next steps." Inside the office, Dr. Victoria explained the process with patience, using accessible terms and detailed graphics to lay out the stages of in vitro fertilization, from ovarian stimulation to embryo transfer. Emily listened attentively, absorbing every detail, though she couldn't shake the occasional flash of doubt that crossed her mind. "This is an intense process, Emily, both physically and emotionally. But I'll be here to guide you every step of the way. And from what I see, you have an excellent support system by your side," Dr. Victoria said, casting a meaningful glance at William. "We're in this together," William replied, his voice firm and steady. He briefly squeezed her hand, as if to remind her that she wasn't alone. In the days that followed, Emily began the hormonal injections, a stage that required both discipline and courage. Each shot was a reminder of her determination to turn a dream into reality. William was there every step of the way, driving her to appointments, helping with medication schedules, and, most importantly, being a constant presence that made her feel valued and supported. Still, there were moments when fear crept in. Alone in her bed at night, Emily wondered about the possibilities and the risks. What if it doesn't work? What if I'm not strong enough? These thoughts would sneak in like shadows, but at the same time, a new light would emerge when she allowed herself to imagine a future where she would finally have the children she so deeply longed for. She pictured the sound of children's laughter, toys scattered around the house, and the joy of raising a family that would be entirely her own. These images kept her grounded, even in the darkest nights. After weeks of tests, procedures, and waiting, the day of the result finally arrived. Sitting in the same waiting room, Emily clenched her hands tightly. William sat beside her, as always, but she could barely hear his encouraging words. When Dr. Victoria finally entered, her serene smile almost made Emily stop breathing. "Emily," the doctor began, "the results are in. Congratulations, you're pregnant." A wave of shock and emotion washed over Emily. Before she could react, Dr. Victoria continued, "And there's more. You're expecting twins." The words hung in the air, surreal. Emily placed her hands over her face, tears streaming down before she could hold them back. William, sitting next to her, looked just as stunned, but his eyes shone with joy. He held her hand tightly, as if he wanted to share in that unforgettable moment. "Twins," Emily whispered, looking at William, then at Dr. Victoria. I don't even know what to say." "Say you're ready for this adventure," Dr. Victoria teased with a smile. Emily nodded, still overwhelmed. For the first time, the future didn't seem daunting. It seemed exciting. That night, Emily gathered Olivia and William at her apartment to celebrate. The small space felt alive with joy as the three of them clinked glasses of orange juice, since wine was out of the question. Olivia, always full of energy, gave Emily a tight hug. "You deserve this, my friend. These babies are lucky to have you as their mother." William, for his part, didn't say much, but his presence spoke volumes. He had been a pillar of support for Emily, not only throughout the process, but emotionally as well. He knew exactly when she needed words of encouragement and when just being there was enough. The months that followed brought challenges, but also an unexpected growth. Emily discovered a strength inside herself that she had never known she possessed. Between prenatal appointments and law school classes, she balanced her responsibilities with preparations for the twins' arrival. Olivia helped with practical details, while William remained a steady voice of reason and calm. One afternoon, over coffee near campus, Emily looked at William with gratitude. "You really didn't have to do all of this for me, William." "I wanted to," he responded simply. "Emily, helping you achieve this dream has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. And in some way, I feel like I've learned so much from you too." Emily smiled, feeling a connection that went beyond friendship or collaboration. William was becoming more than just a support system. He was becoming an essential part of the new life she was building. The soft strains of classical music filled Emily's small apartment as she ran her hand over one of the name lists she had made. She sat in the armchair, a pen in her hand, lost in thought. Choosing names for the twins was more than just a practical decision. It was a statement of who she had become and the future she was building for them. Each name carried a possibility, a story, and a connection to the new chapter she was beginning. Olivia entered the apartment with 2 shopping bags, interrupting Emily's thoughts. "Please tell me you've already chosen at least one name," she joked, placing the bags on the table. You do realize these babies will arrive before you finish that list, right? Emily laughed, putting the list aside. Actually, yes, I've chosen Lucas and Lily Johnson. Olivia's face lit up with a wide smile, both surprised and emotional. Johnson, you decided to use your last name. Yes, Emily replied firmly. I want them to carry the name that represents who I am and everything I've built on my own. I don't need anything else to validate them or me. Olivia sat beside her and took her hand. Lucas and Lily, perfect. They're already lucky to have you as their mother. With the names decided, Emily and Olivia plunged into preparations for the twins' arrival. The small second bedroom of the apartment was transformed into a cozy and loving space. Neutral-colored walls were decorated with star and cloud stickers, and Emily chose simple, functional furniture. Olivia, as always, brought her practical and creative energy. These curtains aren't just beautiful, they block the light, perfect for the baby's naps, she said while installing the rods with precision. Emily watched as each detail transformed before her eyes. The room, which had once been an empty space, now seemed to pulse with life. Creating that home piece by piece reflected her personal journey. As she folded tiny clothes and organized toys on the shelves, she felt a mix of anticipation and gratitude. Audrey, I never thought a room could mean so much. Because it's not just a room, Olivia replied, adjusting a small blanket in the crib. It's the beginning of their lives. And your new life, too. Despite being fully immersed in the preparations, Emily didn't let her pregnancy pull her away from her career. Every day, she continued attending her classes, even when exhaustion weighed on her or her feet ached by the end of the day. Her classmates, who had initially been surprised to see her pregnant, now admired her even more for her resilience. During a presentation on the legal protection of working women, Emily spoke with an intensity that inspired everyone in the room. The balance between career and motherhood shouldn't be a privilege, it should be a right, and we, as lawyers, have the duty to ensure this. These moments were challenging, but they also reaffirmed her strength. She knew that by continuing to pursue her independence and passion for law, she was setting an example for Lucas and Lily. They would grow up knowing that their mother never gave up on herself. On weekends, Emily made time for the ultrasounds, which had become emotional rituals. With each visit to the clinic, she saw Lucas and Lily moving on the screen, their tiny hearts beating strongly. Those moments made the world seem to pause, and all that mattered was the bond she was already feeling growing between them. During one of these sessions, William sat beside her, watching the babies with the same wonder. They already have personalities, he commented, pointing at the screen. Look at how still Lucas is, while Lily doesn't stop moving. Emily laughed, silent tears rolling down her face. You're right. They already have so much life in them. Sometimes I can't believe this is really happening, but as with any great journey, shadows tried to creep in. During a break at university, a classmate approached Emily with a tone of false casualness. Did you hear that Alexander is getting remarried? Apparently the bride is quite young. Emily felt the weight of those words, but she didn't show it. She simply smiled politely and replied, That's great for him. I hope he finds what he's looking for. Later alone, Emily reflected on the news. It wasn't pain she felt, but a sort of distant melancholy. Alexander was part of a chapter she had already closed. He no longer had a place in the future she was building, and thinking about him was like revisiting an old photograph, a static memory of something that no longer defined her. Emily sat in her apartment, folding tiny clothes Olivia had brought as gifts. Her thoughts were focused on Lucas and Lily, on the future she was building with so much effort and love. However, the persistent buzzing of her phone on the table pulled her out of her tranquility. She glanced at the screen, and the name she hadn't seen in months flashed before her eyes, Alexander. The impact was immediate, but it didn't shake her resolve. Emily let the phone ring until it stopped, as if that simple act was a reaffirmation that Alexander no longer had a place in her life. A few minutes later, a message arrived. "We need to talk, Emily. I heard something about your pregnancy. I want to know what's going on." She stared at the text for a moment before deleting it, a wave of indignation rushing over her. Alexander, so indifferent for all this time, was now showing interest, not in her, but in what he believed could affect him. Emily knew that opening any door would only allow him to bring back his manipulation and selfishness into the space she had so carefully rebuilt. In the following days, Alexander intensified his attempts. Calls, messages, and even visits to her campus. Emily made sure to avoid him, but she could feel his shadow getting closer. It didn't take long before Olivia warned her. "Emily, I've heard rumors that Alexander is asking about the babies. He wants to know if he could be the father." The news hit her like a spark in a barrel of gunpowder. Emily knew Alexander had the money and resources to interfere if he wanted, but she also knew she didn't owe him anything. Lucas and Lily were not the result of their failed marriage. They were the outcome of her courage and resilience. However, the thought of Alexander trying to claim a place in her children's lives made her uneasy. She needed protection, and she knew exactly who to turn to. The next day, she sat in William's office. He listened attentively as Emily explained Alexander's attempts to get closer. "He's asking about the babies. I don't know what he wants, but I won't allow him to disturb my peace, William. I need to make sure he stays away from me and the children." William, with the calm demeanor that always reassured her, responded, "You're absolutely right, Emily. He has no right here. If he tries anything, we'll handle it legally. But I want you to know you're not alone. We'll protect you and the babies." His support was like a safe harbor amidst the storm Alexander was beginning to stir. William prepared all the necessary documents to ensure that any attempt from Alexander to claim paternity would be blocked legally. Emily, for her part, gathered all the documentation related to the in vitro fertilization and the consultations with Dr. Victoria to reinforce her position. The conflict escalated when Alexander's legal representatives sent Emily a formal notice demanding clarification about the babies. Alexander, seemingly convinced that he might be their father, insisted on interfering. William responded swiftly, sending a firm reply that not only rejected Alexander's claims, but also warned him of the legal consequences of harassment or defamation. "He thinks he can enter your life again just because he heard something that hurts his ego," William said during a meeting with Emily. "But he underestimates who you've become, and that's a big mistake." Despite the tension, Emily felt strengthened by William's firm stance. At the same time, she reflected on Alexander's audacity. The man who had ignored her pain for years now thought he could claim something in a life he had chosen to abandon. His attempt at re-entering her life only reaffirmed how much she had grown and how he remained stuck in his own pride. One sunny morning, Alexander appeared in front of Emily's building. When she looked out from the balcony and saw him standing there, a mix of disbelief and exhaustion washed over her. He seemed to be waiting for her to come down, but Emily didn't give him any sign of acknowledgement. She immediately called William, who arrived in less than half an hour. Alexander was still there when William parked, walking calmly toward him, making it clear that there was no room for discussion. "From now on, any contact you wish to have with Emily or her children will have to be done through legal channels," William said, his voice firm. Alexander tried to argue, but William didn't allow any space for it. "If you continue with this, you'll be breaking the law. I suggest you reconsider your actions." Alexander walked away, visibly frustrated, but Emily knew he had understood the message. That scene was a symbolic closing of a chapter she had already moved on from. For the first time, she felt completely free from the past, protected not only by William, but by her own strength. The early morning was calm, but Emily's heart raced as she was guided by the medical team toward the delivery room. William held her hand, offering the reassurance she needed, while Olivia waited anxiously in the waiting room. Her water had broken earlier that evening, and everything had happened so quickly that Emily was still trying to process it. But as she listened to the doctor's instructions and felt the strength of the moment, an overwhelming wave of emotion took over her. Finally, Lucas and Lily were about to arrive. A few hours later, the first cry echoed through the room, filling Emily's heart with indescribable joy. Lucas came into the world first, healthy and strong, with small, curious eyes that seemed to search for his mother's face. Moments later, Lily followed, lighter and more delicate, but with the same powerful presence Emily had always imagined her to have. When they were placed in her arms, tears flowed freely from Emily. "Hi, my loves," she whispered, gently caressing them. It was as if the world had stopped in that instant, and the only thing that mattered was the pure, unconditional love she felt. William was by her side, watching the scene with teary eyes. "Emily, they're perfect. You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Emily smiled at him, feeling an immense sense of gratitude. He had been more than a friend during this entire journey. He was a pillar, someone she trusted completely. When Emily was taken back to her room, Olivia couldn't hold back her tears as she saw the twins. "Lucas and Lily, welcome to the world," she said, holding Lily carefully, while William cradled Lucas in his arms. "You have the best mother in the world." After a few days in the hospital, Emily finally brought the twins home. The small apartment, now filled with baby items, felt more welcoming than ever. As she placed Lucas and Lily in their cribs for the first time, she felt a peace she had never experienced before. The soft morning light illuminated their peaceful faces, and Emily knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The next morning, Emily went to the civil registry to register her children. With the documents in hand, she felt a firm conviction in her heart as she filled out the forms. Lucas Johnson and Lily Johnson. No other signature or surname would be on those documents. They would carry her name, the proof of her strength, resilience, and love. When the clerk handed her the birth certificates, she held them carefully, as if they symbolized everything she had overcome to get to this point. That night, after putting the babies to sleep, Emily sat with her journal, something she had picked up again since starting her solo journey. The words flowed easily, coming straight from her heart. Today, when I looked at Lucas and Lily, I felt a wave of love that I can barely describe. They are everything I ever dreamed of and so much more. I promise I will do everything in my power to give them a life filled with love, security, and joy. They don't need anything more than that. I never knew that the peace I've always searched for was here in this little home with them. No more doubts, just gratitude. As she wrote, a memory of Alexander crossed her mind, but it was quickly erased. He no longer had a place in her story, and the certainty of that was comforting. Emily felt that by registering her children under her own last name, she had reaffirmed not only her autonomy, but also her commitment to their future. There was no room for complications from the past, only love and new beginnings. Olivia and William continued to be constant presences in Emily's life. Olivia, always vibrant, organized small celebrations in the apartment, bringing flowers, food, and even a cake to celebrate each milestone of the twins. William, for his part, was always available, from helping with grocery shopping to taking care of the twins so Emily could rest. "You're not alone, and you never will be," he said often, as a promise he kept every day. One evening, while the three of them were gathered at Emily's apartment, Olivia suggested a toast. "To Lucas and Lily, who have brought a new light to all of us, and to you, Emily, for being the amazing mother we all know you are. William raised his glass as well, looking directly at Emily. To you, who not only overcame everything, but also became an example of strength and love. Emily, overwhelmed, looked at the friends who had become her family, and then at the twins, who were peacefully sleeping in the next room. The feeling of belonging and support was so strong that she couldn't hold back her tears. Thank you for being with me every step of this journey. I never would have made it without you. But now, more than ever, I know we're exactly where we're meant to be. Alexander's office was immersed in silence. The piece of paper in front of him seemed to scream the words he wished he had never read. Irreversible azoospermia, it read, the final diagnosis from the urologist he had seen in the past weeks. He read the words over and over, as though staring at them would somehow make them change. But they didn't change. The truth was clear. Alexander was infertile. He always had been. Sitting in his leather chair, Alexander felt the weight of this revelation crush the image of himself he had so carefully constructed over the years. For years, he had prided himself on the male legacy of his family, the bloodline he carried, and what he believed to be his unquestionable ability to pass it on. Now all of that crumbled like a sandcastle swept away by the tide. His thoughts immediately turned to Emily, the woman he had accused, ignored, and abandoned, driven by his own ego. The memory of his words, filled with hurt and frustration, came back like a slap in the face. Why can't you just admit you're afraid, Alexander, that something might be wrong with you? In that moment, her voice seemed to echo in the empty room. He pushed back from his chair, standing abruptly and pacing back and forth. The pride that had defined him for so long was now his greatest punishment. He realized that instead of confronting his own insecurities, he had chosen to make Emily the scapegoat. And in doing so, not only had he lost her, but he had also destroyed any chance of a future with her. When he arrived home that night, Sarah, his current wife, immediately noticed something was wrong. "Alexander, what happened? You've been acting strange since yesterday. Was it the appointment?" she asked, following him into their bedroom. He removed his suit jacket without looking at her. "It was the appointment," he replied dryly. Sarah approached cautiously. "So, what did the doctor say?" Alexander hesitated for a moment before handing her the diagnosis sheet. Sarah read it quickly, her eyes widening as she understood what it meant. "Oh, Alexander," she started, reaching out to touch him, but he pulled away. "You don't need to say anything, Sarah," he interrupted, his voice heavy with bitterness. "I know what this means. And before you start trying to comfort me, know that it doesn't change anything. There's nothing to be done." "Of course it changes," Sarah insisted, trying again to approach him. "Alexander, we can get through this together. There are other options. We can adopt, or maybe—" "I don't want to talk about it," he cut her off coldly. Sarah stopped, hurt, but didn't press further. Over the following days, the distance between them grew. Alexander withdrew further into himself, spending hours in his office, avoiding any deeper conversation. Sarah tried to reach him, but was met with silence or curt replies. Eventually, her patience began to wear thin. One night, as Alexander reviewed documents at his desk, something unexpected caught his attention. A photo of Emily appeared on his news feed. It was a simple image, but it was full of meaning. She was in a park, holding 2 children in her arms. Lucas and Lily, he thought, feeling an emotion he couldn't quite identify. The faces of the children beamed with happiness, and Emily looked radiant, happier than he had ever seen her. Alexander froze, staring at the screen for several minutes. That moment was confirmation of everything he had lost, not just Emily, but the chance to be part of something so pure and meaningful. He spent the rest of the day lost in thought. For the first time, he truly confronted the mistakes of his past. His inability to admit his vulnerabilities, his obsession with controlling everything, his fear of being seen as weak. All of this had led him to destroy what had been the most valuable thing in his life. Now he was alone, with a marriage on the brink of collapse and a career that, while successful, felt hollow. The following week, Alexander made a decision. He requested an extended leave from his law firm and left the city for a while. He needed distance, silence, a fresh start. He went to a small village in the countryside, far from the pressures and expectations that had defined his life up until then. There he began to reflect on how to rebuild his identity, not as the successful lawyer or the man proud of his family's legacy, but as someone willing to face his imperfections. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the curtains on the balcony, gently warming Emily's small apartment as she watched Lucas and Lily playing on the rug in the living room, their laughter filling the air with contagious joy. The twins, now just over a year old, were full of energy and curiosity, transforming the space with their every move. William sat on the sofa with a cup of coffee, watching the scene with a serene smile. He had become such a natural part of their home that it felt like he had always been there. What had begun as a genuine friendship between Emily and William had evolved into something much deeper. The connection between them, built on respect and admiration, had blossomed into a solid romantic relationship. William had always been Emily's safe harbor, but now he was the man with whom she began to envision a future. There was no rush, no need to prove anything to anyone, just a mutual desire to build something meaningful together. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, William and Emily were in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner. "Have you ever thought about how all of this happened?" he asked, chopping vegetables while she stirred a pot on the stove. "I mean, how our lives crossed paths in such unexpected ways." Emily smiled, remembering everything they had been through. "I think about it all the time," she replied. "Sometimes I feel like the universe knew exactly what it was doing. You came into my life when I needed you most, but also when I was finally ready to be who I truly am." William put the knife down and stepped toward her, taking her hands in his. "Emily, you have no idea how much I admire your strength, and not just for everything you've been through, but for how you turned it into something beautiful. Lucas and Lily are lucky to have you as their mother, and I'm lucky to have you by my side." Emily's eyes shone with emotion. For the first time, she felt like she was in a relationship where she could be completely herself. William accepted her, victories and scars alike, and together they were building a bond that was genuine and lasting. Meanwhile, Lucas and Lily were growing up surrounded by love and care. Each new step or word from the twins was celebrated by everyone around them, especially Olivia, who remained an indispensable part of this improvised but perfect family. "They have your smile, you know," Olivia once said as she helped organize a small birthday party for the twins. "But their energy, that's definitely all them." The love and happiness Emily felt at home were reflected in her professional life. Her years of dedication to law school and family law had led to a significant promotion. She was now the head of the family law department at the university, an accomplishment that not only validated her competence, but also highlighted her resilience. During her first meeting as the department head, she presented ambitious plans to expand support programs for women in vulnerable situations. "If my story has taught me anything," she told her colleagues, "it's that justice isn't just about laws. It's about giving a voice to those who need to be heard." Those moments were challenging, but they also reaffirmed her strength. She knew that by continuing to pursue her independence and passion for law, she was setting a powerful example for Lucas and Lily. They would grow up knowing that their mother never gave up on herself. On a sunny weekend at the park, William finally asked the question he had been rehearsing for weeks. "Emily," he began, as they watched Lucas and Lily play together, "I know life hasn't always been easy for you, but I want you to know that with you, I've found something I never imagined I could have. I want to build a future with you." With all three of you. Will you marry me? Emily was momentarily speechless, surprised by the emotions the proposal stirred in her. Her eyes filled with tears, but her smile was the clearest answer. Yes, she said, her voice trembling. Yes, William. I want to build that future with you. With the wedding on the horizon, they also began planning a move to a bigger house. Emily found a spacious, welcoming place in a quiet neighborhood, perfect for the twins to grow up in. The house had a sunny garden where Lucas and Lily could play freely, and an office that Emily would use for her work at the university. The moving process was exhausting, but also filled with excitement and expectations. Every detail, from choosing the rooms to picking furniture for the new living room, was decided together, as a family. When they finally moved in, Emily felt a deep sense of peace as she watched the twins running around the garden, while William set up a swing. She looked around at the house, now filled with life, and realized that everything she had gone through had led her to this moment. For the first time, she felt that she had reached the harmony she had always wanted. It was a delicate balance between motherhood, career, and love, but she managed it with the strength that only someone who had been through so much could possess. That night, after putting Lucas and Lily to bed, Emily and William sat on the balcony of their new home. "You did it," William said, holding her hand. "You created the life you always dreamed of." Emily looked at him and then at the starry sky. "It wasn't easy, but every step was worth it. And the best part is I didn't do it alone. I have you. We're a family." The auditorium in Austin buzzed with excitement, filled with eager voices and anxious murmurs as participants took their seats. It was an important event, with experts from all over Mexico gathered to discuss the new challenges and family structure models in contemporary society. Among the most anticipated speakers was Emily Johnson, whose personal journey and professional experience had made her a leading voice on the subject. When the presenter announced her name, the audience erupted in applause, and Emily walked onto the stage with a confidence that illuminated the entire room. Emily began her presentation with a clear, strong tone, capturing the audience's attention from the very first words. "Family is not defined by fixed patterns, but by the love, respect, and mutual support we nurture in our relationships," she declared, presenting studies and concrete examples that challenged traditional stereotypes. Her voice carried not only knowledge, but the conviction of someone who had lived through the very issues she was sharing. She wove personal anecdotes into her research, not afraid to use her own story as an example of resilience and reinvention. Alexander sat in the last row of the auditorium, half hidden in the shadows. He hadn't planned on being there. He'd come to Austin on business and had just happened to find out about the event. Seeing Emily's name on the program had stirred something within him, a mix of curiosity and regret that pushed him to enter the room. Now, as he listened to her speak, he felt both mesmerized and deeply affected. The woman in front of him seemed completely transformed, confident, serene, and exuding a magnetic presence. He couldn't associate her with the woman he had once treated with such indifference and disregard. When the presentation ended, the audience stood in applause. Alexander remained motionless, as if processing everything he had just witnessed. As people began to leave, he stayed in his seat until finally he mustered the courage to go backstage. He wanted to see her, speak with her. Perhaps there was a way to reconnect. Backstage, Emily was with Lucas and Lily, who had traveled with her to Austin. The twins were running between the chairs, full of energy, while Olivia, who had accompanied them, watched with a smile. Emily was crouched down, helping Lucas tie his shoelaces, when she felt someone's gaze fixed on her. Looking up, she saw Alexander standing at the entrance to the room, clearly uncomfortable but determined. The initial shock quickly turned into a mix of irritation and caution. "Alexander," she said, standing up and walking toward him, her arms crossed. What are you doing here? Alexander hesitated, realizing the emotional distance still between them. He looked at Lucas and Lily, who were now standing up, curious about the stranger. I was at your presentation. You were incredible, Emily. I needed to say that. Emily remained impassive. Thank you, but I don't see what else we need to discuss. Alexander looked away, clearly disconcerted. I saw the twins, he said finally. They're beautiful, and I couldn't help but notice some features in them. Emily understood immediately where he was going with this. Her expression grew more serious. Lucas and Lily have absolutely nothing to do with you, Alexander. They are the result of my courage and the choices I made. You have no right or place in their lives. Her words hit him like a blow. Alexander tried to argue, but she interrupted him, her voice firm and unyielding. You made your decisions a long time ago, and I made mine. You chose to abandon me. You chose not to face your own fears. I moved on, and you should do the same. Alexander fell silent, her words echoing in his mind. He realized she was right. There was no space for him in the new world Emily had built. All he could do now was accept the consequences of his actions and let her live in peace. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice thick with regret. I'm sorry for everything. Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked over at the twins, who had gone back to playing, and then at Olivia, who was watching from a distance, ready to step in if needed. I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Alexander, but this conversation ends here. He nodded slowly, with nothing more to say. He turned and left the room, his shoulders slumped, feeling the weight of the past he had created. Later, at the hotel, while putting Lucas and Lily to sleep, Emily felt a wave of relief wash over her. Encountering Alexander had been unexpected, but it had also reaffirmed everything she already knew. The past no longer had power over her. She gently stroked Lucas's hair and kissed Lily's forehead before sitting down at the table to write her thoughts in her journal. Today, once again, I was reminded of how my choices have brought me here. Lucas and Lily are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and the love we've built together is all I need. My peace, my happiness, don't depend on anyone but me, and that is liberating. As she closed the journal, Emily felt stronger than ever. The future was full of possibilities, and she knew she would face it with the same courage that had guided her to this point.